This episode, I'm joined by Adam Lovasz, who is an independent researcher and philosopher based in Budapest, Hungary. In this episode, we discuss his book, Updating Bergson, A Philosophy of the Enduring Present, alongside discussions on Bergson's philosophy, the philosophy of Gilles Deleuze, and subjects such as change and time. I'd like to say a big thank you to all my paid patrons and subscribers for making all of this work possible, and if you would like to support Hermitix and keep the podcast running indefinitely alongside getting access to some exclusive content, please find links in the description below. Enjoy. So, Adam Lovasz, thanks very much for joining us on Hermitix podcast.
Thank you, it's great to be here.
We are going to be discussing your book, which was published May of this year, Updating Bergson, A Philosophy of the Enduring Present, published by Lexington Books. A book which is tackling the work and philosophy, of course, of Henri Bergson, and as you can imagine from the title, updating it and also tackling much of the contemporary discussion around Bergson and also the sort of Bergson after Deleuze debate as well. But before we jump in with the book, just tell us a little bit about yourself, what it is you do, and how this book came about.
I'm currently a PhD student and a PhD researcher at Lovasz Law University in Budapest. And I have lots of different interests regarding various types of philosophy, mainly continental philosophy, social philosophy, but also various types of philosophy which sort of question the anthropocentrism or the centrality of humans. So I'm very interested in all sorts of different philosophies which sort of question the idea that humans are at the center of the universe, or humans are the most important creatures or things which exist. And I was very drawn to Bergson's work because I've done various research into, on the one hand, posthumanism and the sort of philosophical precedents of posthumanism, but also the philosophy of Deleuze and Guattari. So I really came to Bergson through Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari, and I sort of found that there are very interesting contents in Bergson which I want to sort of work out. And the idea for this book, basically, so I guess this sort of question revolves around why Bergson. So why is Bergson interesting for us in 2021? And I think the reason I wrote this book is basically because Bergson was one of the last philosophers, I think, who sort of viewed philosophy as this science of sciences. So this sort of idea that philosophy can integrate all these different sciences into one ultra science, I guess. This really isn't, after Bergson, you have a couple of other thinkers like Whitehead and Deleuze who continue this tradition, but it becomes very rare, very difficult because the natural sciences have become so complex. Everyone has their different area of expertise, and it's very hard for philosophy to keep up with the developments in the natural sciences. But Bergson really was, in many ways, Bergson has become very inspiring for me because Bergson was one of these philosophers who tried to integrate knowledge into this and create a sort of view of the world, like an image of the world, by using biology, physics, chemistry, whatever, and putting it all together into one, like in this holistic view of the world. And this was the inspiration for my book, to find a philosopher who was capable and ambitious enough to put all the sciences together into one philosophy. And this is the reason I chose Bergson. Another reason is that Bergson is not very distant from us in terms of time. So I didn't want to go back to like the ancient Greeks or the Stoics or whatever, not because I do not like them or anything, but because Bergson is nevertheless familiar enough for us. Like he was living in the same sort of, a similar sort of society similar age. We're in many ways living in a similar age to the early 20th century, but maybe we could get back into that later. But so the historical period is also similar to the early 20th century. We're having major scientific revolutions the same way as we had back then. So it's a complex range of factors why I consciously decided to choose Bergson and not someone earlier, for example.
Okay. Yeah, he seems to be situated, right in the strange position there, like you, as you've explained. I've realized I can't explain it as well as you have there. So, but there is a question I've outlined there, which I think we'll jump into just after the Hermetics question relating to Deleuze, because I think perhaps it's a good place to begin from. But before we do so, I do have to ask you the Hermetics question. You can place 3 thinkers, living or dead, into a room and listen in on the conversation. Who do you pick? And we can, as we are talking primarily about Bergson, we can include Henri Bergson and then add 3 more.
I would be very interested in Heraclitus, Bergson, and maybe Nietzsche or Schopenhauer. I think one of those is optional, but so I'd be very interested in what Heraclitus has to say about later, like modern philosophers who have been inspired by this sort of view of the world as eternal change, like people who have been influenced by these fragments. So that'd be very fascinating to listen to what even whether they can understand each other. So that's sort of my problem with the ancient Greeks, in many ways, is that we don't have a common philosophical language with them. Like, they were living in a completely different type of society. And there are some things which are the same, but we're living in a very different age, very different technologies. And I don't think that an ancient, but so it would still be very interesting, though, like what Heraclitus thought of like Bergson, and like what he would make of it, and what they would ask each other. I guess that would be very fascinating thought experiment. Maybe someone could write a book like this someday.
Do you? I mean, I'm sort of this opinion as well, that the way it seems that we study these figures from the past immediately modernizes them, not in relation to like what we consider modern philosophy, but just modernizes them with our own language, our own habits and customs, and we could say modernizes them with our own tongue. And I always wonder, if we put one of these people from the classical era in a room, or even from the medieval era, or perhaps even not that long ago, would the idiosyncrasies and tiny traits of these people, there'd be so many of them, and they'd be so subtly different that a communication between the two people would just be very, very strange and perhaps even impossible,
Yeah, and it's very interesting how we don't have like in a certain period you could only be a philosopher if you spoke ancient Greek, for example, or like you had to know Greek or Latin if you were like a real philosopher, and we're not living in that age anymore. But yeah, I mean, like if we sit with Bergson in a cafe today, I don't think he will be that freaked out, I guess, by the various technological implements we have, or the cars or anything, because they had almost a lot of stuff back then, 1910, 1920, 1930s. Like he went to cinema and everything. So he would be very. It would be very strange for Bergson to have all these small screens everywhere, like smartphones, for example, but he wouldn't be surprised, I think. So, but for an ancient Greek, that's a very different proposition. Like they would be completely flabbergasted by this inundation of images we live in. So, yeah, it's very hard to imagine what that would be like, but it's a very good thought experiment. So I'd be very interested. I'd be very impressed by a philosopher who writes a book like this, like a conversation with 3 dead philosophers. Yeah.
Okay. Perhaps Heraclitus, Nietzsche, and Schopenhauer might come back in. But I mean, I want to touch on something that was definitely going to come up in this chat, and it plays a role in your book as well. And I think it's increasingly common, because you said that you first came across Bergson through the work of Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari. We're talking of capitalism and schizophrenia, what is philosophy, the work on cinema, but then Deleuze himself with Bergsonism, and basically, the sort of the history seems to go that Bergson was intellectually dead after the famous Einstein debate, which we'll get into later, and then nothing much really happened with Bergson, correct me if I'm wrong, and then Deleuze picks him up, and after that there is a sort of a second wave of revitalization, bit of a pun there, of Bergson, but this is sort of considered now Bergsonism. So, I guess my question is how it's increasingly common for people to first come across Bergson via Deleuze. How helpful do you really think this is in understanding Bergson? Do you think this ultimately ends in people who are interested in Bergson having to it's like one step forward, two steps back? They learn something, but then the subtle perhaps changes that Deleuze might be making, or alterations, they have to sort of take a step back and begin again in a way.
Yes, I am absolutely in many ways indebted to what Deleuze did in revitalizing Bergson. So without Deleuze, I probably would not have gone back to Bergson, for example. And I think many people are really do find Bergson, rediscover Bergson through Deleuze. But it's also, as you hinted, it's also problematic because in many ways it reduces Bergson to Deleuze's philosophy, and the two are not the same at all. So we have to be very careful when we read anything. When Deleuze was not a historian of other philosophers, so he reads Bergson in a way which he tries to create his own philosophy from Bergson, which is, I'm not saying it's a bad thing necessarily. It's a very creative way of reading, but he makes not just subtle changes, but very drastic changes to Bergson. So it's a trap in many ways, because if we see a book about a philosopher which was written by another philosopher, we think that it's a summary of the other philosopher, it's a commentary or something, but it's actually not. I could get into like technical details. The basic gist of my problem with Deleuze's book, it's Bergsonism. That's the title of Deleuze's book. It was published in 1966, if I remember correctly. And it really did result in a sort of revitalization of Bergson literature, but especially after it was translated into English. So actually from the 1980s in the English language area. And so Deleuze was helpful, but it's in many ways Deleuze is very wrong, because, for example, he emphasizes that virtuality is the central concept of Bergson's philosophy. This is what Deleuze is claiming, but this is false. It's categorically false, and it doesn't play any sort of major role in Bergson's philosophy. It's all about actuality. It's all about pure change. What Bergson calls duration is basically change. It's the process of change. So Bergson is more of purely a process philosopher, and the way Deleuze uses the virtual, he makes it into almost a sort of Platonic idea. It's completely unnecessary for understanding Bergson, I think. And I mean, this is a radical view, but I think we do not need the virtual to understand what Bergson is talking about. It's completely redundant in many ways. So this is the sort of the trap of relying on Deleuze to read Bergson. We basically, if we want to understand a thinker, we have to read the author themselves, and then find out if the people who have written about that author are correct or incorrect. And Deleuze is, if we read it just through in this way, then Deleuze's reading of Bergson is completely baseless. Actually, it has nothing to do with Bergson, basically, or just in some ways. But it's not about Bergson. It's about Deleuze. It's about the way he uses the actual and the virtual. So it tells us more about Deleuze than about Bergson. So in many ways, my book was motivated by also a sort of disillusionment about Deleuze. But it's not just, I don't just attack Deleuze. I also have some good things to say about Deleuze's later books, the cinema books. In there, I think he gets closer to what Bergson is talking about. So it's not one-sided. It's the 1960s Deleuze, I guess, which is, I think he places way too much emphasis on the virtual.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, Deleuze does that a lot. I mean, perhaps it's a long time coming that someone finally says, look, these books are about Deleuze and not about the authors that he's writing about. Unfortunately, I mean, I can't speak for the French translation, the original French titles, but in English translation, they do, as you say, if you were to take them at face value, they do come across as works which are simply commentaries. I'm thinking Kant's... God, I forgot the title of that one, but Spinoza, Practical Philosophy, Bergsonism, etc., etc. These are books which come across as commentaries, and Deleuze sort of, perhaps quite subtly, enters his own work into there. But I mean, this is quite interesting in relation then to your title. Updating Bergson. Your reason for updating Bergson is almost an update which is stepping back in time and beginning from the start. It's not as if it's an innovative. And would you consider it innovative? This update that you're talking about, and why do you think it is that Bergson needs updating in this way?
Yeah, this is a very interesting question regarding updating. I think so we have to go back to the pre-Deleuze Bergson in many ways to really understand what Bergson is about. I think we have to bracket what Deleuze has written about Bergson, and we really just go back to the source itself in many ways. And I think this is a sort of ambivalence in the very meaning of the word update. So when we update something, we're doing something new, but also going back and starting again. So that was my motivation for I guess, this sort of title. And it's also refreshing. We have to go back, but also bring something new, and also bring some of our knowledge, current day knowledge, back in time as well. So, especially, some of Bergson's work, like when he talks about the psychology in the late 19th century, it comes across sometimes as a little bit dated. So, some of the, obviously, science has greatly expanded since over the last century. So the reason we need updating is to sort of separate the noise from the information. So the really important, I guess the spirit of what Bergson is doing, to separate it from the individual details. So some of the scientific examples are not always 100% up to date in what Bergson is doing, but it sort of works in a going back, but also going forward. So when we update something, we're doing a sort of innovation as well. So I'm not making the claim that what I'm doing is 100% in line with all of Bergson's philosophy. There's some of his philosophy which is not really up to our current day standards of what knowledge is about. So I'm not trying to say that Bergson is without fault. But what I'm saying is that it contains a sort of method, I guess, and in this Deleuze was correct that Bergson contains a sort of good method, I think, for integrating knowledge, and that's intuition. Intuition is, I think, the key concept of Bergson, and the intuition of duration. So the getting to know what change is about, taking change seriously, but also taking time seriously. So, and sort of changing our way of what we think about time. That's crucial, I think, for what Bergson is doing. The idea of having an intuition of change. And this intuition, so we need to update by I bring many current scientific examples, which are of the past 5-10 years, which maybe sort of give basis to what Bergson is doing, what Bergson is talking about. So I sort of try to bring contemporary examples as well as Bergson's own examples sometimes. And I think it's so this is what Bergson can give us, I guess, a sort of method for philosophically integrating various types of knowledge, various registers, and creating a sort of philosophical view of the world, and to really have this, I guess, bravery. So philosophy needs more bravery, I think, to sort of push back against this sort of idea that, which is very common today, unfortunately, that philosophy should just follow blindly what the natural sciences are doing and just like assist what the natural. So physicists have to talk about what the world is like, what the reality is, and philosophy has nothing original to add to what physicists are doing. I think that's a very wrong approach. And Bergson demonstrated that philosophy can be more. Like it can give us an original new type of knowledge about reality. And that's what intuition is about. It's a sort of rational, but also speculative knowledge of reality and the way that reality is changed, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, as we've sort of been mentioning these biographical elements of Bergson and the sort of the history elements, I guess it's something to bring in here in relation to what you're talking about there, this relationship between science and philosophy, which, you know, very, very roughly, of course, I'm sure a historian of philosophy could pick me apart here, but it seems to be that up until a certain point, there was a relationship between science and philosophy which was one where one bolstered the other, one learnt from the other, and they weren't really understood. Back to our conversation at the start about how we speak about if we could ever communicate with classical philosophers, what is understood of what science is by definition and what philosophy is by definition in say the day of Descartes. It's commonly said now that if Descartes was alive today, he would primarily be seen as a scientist, in quotation marks, as a definition, a scientist than a philosopher, and probably the same with Leibniz as well. And so it's, there's this sort of damning moment in the history of philosophy, which is this Bergson-Einstein debate where Bergson famously sort of, loses, for whatever that means. But his sort of loss in not being able to truly understand, if I recall correctly, what Einstein was trying to explain, sort of changed the relationship between science and philosophy, at least in the public view. I don't know if you want to sort of expand on this and sort of state perhaps how we could productively move past the separation of science and philosophy, and perhaps find a I don't like this word, but a holistic approach to both.
Yeah, one of the chapters, it's about the Einstein-Bergson debate, and basically, I think it was really a huge disaster for philosophy. This not the debate itself, but the way it was then framed. So actually, a large part of why Bergsons became very less popular was that he was perceived as being the sort of the loser of this 1922 debate. But if we actually look at this, was actually published sometime in the 1960s in English at the transcripts of the debate, we find something very different. We actually find that Einstein is actually the one who completely missed the point of what Bergson is trying to say. So actually, it was the physicist Einstein simply wasn't a good enough philosopher to understand what Bergson is talking about. I mean, that's the gist. That's the problem here. However strange it seems, this is the case. Einstein thought that Bergson was talking about the subjective experience of time, so like psychological time, like the way I feel time is heading somewhere, like the way time goes fast or slow for me if I'm feeling depressed or happy or something. Like this is what Einstein thought Bergson was talking about. But Bergson, actually, if we look at it, Bergson is talking about something very different. Actually, what Bergson was objecting to in Einstein's theory of relativity is that it's not relativist enough. Relativity doesn't, Einstein's theory of relativity, according to Bergson, it doesn't go far enough because it's still talking about a single, it's talking about time in the singular, because time is basically spatialized in the Einsteinian system, at least according to Bergson, and also it's connected to the speed of light. And this, for Bergson, it's not relativist enough. So what Bergson is talking about is that time, it's more than any subjective experience of time, but it's also more than any physicist can find out about time. So time is sort of more than any scientific approach can also inform us about time. So time has way more layers than any type of human knowledge can integrate into itself. Duration, there's always several types of duration. It's not a single duration. This is what Einstein didn't understand, because he thought Bergson is just a phenomenologist, basically. Phenomenology would be the idea that there is a lived subjective time. And Bergson doesn't deny that there is such a type of time, but that's not the whole story of duration. So duration is change, basically. Bergson's philosophy, it's a philosophy of change. And it's a sort of relativist view of time as well. There's not a single time. There's countless different forms of time. There's physiological time, the time of our body, like in aging, for example. There's obviously cycle experience time. There is also the time of life, the élan vital. There's no real good translation for this, but it's like the life force or the life. That's also a type of duration. So the whole evolution of life, it's also a form of duration for Bergson. There is also the duration of matter in itself. Bergson is very much also a materialist in many ways, which is very interesting because people don't usually read him as that. But Bergson also says that matter has a time of its own. So this is four big types of time, four different modes of change. So Einstein is very much actually way more conservative than Bergson when it comes to thinking about time. And like Einstein wouldn't have accepted that there is like countless different modes of time or something. Like he was very much in this idea of he was very much a conservative materialist in this sense that there is just physical time and that's it, and any other type of time is nonsense or imaginary or whatever. So Bergson was actually more of a more advanced type of relativist than Einstein, and that's the problem, that the physicists simply, and the other like Einstein's colleagues, either this point was completely lost upon them. They were just talking about physical time, and that's it. So that's a very one-sided view of reality.
So what do you think it is that people might often get wrong about Bergson's understanding of time?
The biggest mistake, one of the biggest mistakes, is viewing Bergson as a phenomenologist. So as someone who is just talking about the lived experience of time, as if that were duration. That's part of what Bergson is talking about, but it's not the whole story when it comes to change. So there's this very common reading of Bergson that he's just talking about the way I experience the flow of time in my consciousness. But that's just one type of duration. So like it's not the whole, not the only type of duration. So there's in my book I identify basically well, I mean, three basic types of duration, but you can add the fourth one as well. So the ones I mentioned, so this is psychological lived time, the physiological time, the time of my body, which is not the same as my psychological time. So that's two. Then you have the time of life in general, the elan vital. And so the fourth is the time of matter. Which is sort of close to instantaneous. Sort of matter is like Bergson claims that it's sort of it's almost close to an instant. It doesn't have memory, for example. Atoms don't really remember things, whereas humans do, animals do. But it's actually more complex than that, because matter also has a sort of so there's no clear-cut. Actually, when we delve deeper into what Bergson is talking about, it appears that Bergson is in a creative evolution. It's a major book. It's about the evolution of life, creative evolution. It looks on first impressions that Bergson is putting life on one side and matter on the other. Like matter is like dead, life is living. It's evolving, changing, and matter is like not living, not spontaneous, not changing. But actually, it's not the case, because when we look deeper, and this is what I talk about, is that actually there's no clear-cut dividing line between what is alive and what is dead. So that Bergson is not actually a vitalist in this sense, because matter is also in a way living. It's sort of anything can become alive in Bergson's view. Matter is just life which is waiting to evolve and emerge. So it's a very strange view of the universe, but that's what Bergson is claiming. So that there's no clear-cut dividing line between the organic or the inorganic, for example. So I've gotten a bit ahead of myself, but so that there's no, the point here is that there's no one type of time, basically. That this is what I think is a very intriguing idea, that we can really distinguish between these the different types of time. So like the whole process of life's evolution, it's a sort of continuity in a way. This is also very important. This is an important point, that a duration, a change, it's continuous. So it's continuous and also heterogeneous. So it's a heterogeneous, like, difference. Continuity, which is heterogeneous. It sounds like a self-contradiction, but it's actually not. No duration can be sliced up into pieces. It's continuous. It's a continuum, every single duration, but still they sort of build up onto each other. Like humans have, for example, in the case of humans, we have evolved from the elan vital. We're also part of the continuity of life, but we also have our own psychological time as well. I don't know how complicated this all sounds, but I'm trying to.
Perhaps if we took a couple of terms which we might be able to situate ourselves, that I put in the questions here, how could we formulate or begin to understand or re-understand, so to speak, the ideas such as progress and stability within this Bergsonian form of, or these Bergsonian formulations of time?
Yeah, I mean, Bergson, he denies that there is such a thing as possibility, which is interesting, because there's only pure actualization. Like there's nothing. It's not a like when we can say an example, like when a new species evolves, for example, like you have an animal which didn't exist before. It's not a case of a possibility becoming realized. Like there was like a possibility for a new type of fly to evolve. There was nothing there before. We can only say that in hindsight, biologists talk about how there was an ecological niche which had to be filled, and a new species came, evolved, and to fill that niche. But this is, Bergson would say that this is only a sort of retrospective projection of what there's a fact now, which we see that there is a new species, and we sort of try and think about why that thing has evolved, but there was nothing actually there before. So there's no such, in Bergson's philosophy, there's absolutely nothing like possibility. There's just pure change. There's no previously existing possibility. And this has very important social ramifications, actually, regarding the idea of progress. Because we imagine progress to be something which is like heading from one place to another, like a future. From the past, we're going to the present, to the future. There's some sort of future which we're heading towards. There's a sort of a teleology or something. There's a direction. Like many people who believe in progress, not everyone, but a lot of people who believe in progress and claim that they're progressive, they believe in a sort of, that there's a direction in history, like we're heading towards some sort of final state or utopia or something. And if we think about time and change through Bergson's philosophy, well, we can't really say that there is any sort of direction in social evolution, in natural evolution. We can't say what the next animal species will look like, or what the next form of life, or the next type of animal, or the next type of society will look like. It's impossible, because there's no such thing as possibility. We're only going to know what the next species or the next social system will look like once we're there. So this is really that progress, it only becomes visible in hindsight, which is if we accept what Bergson is talking about. So based on Bergson's philosophy, we can only see in hindsight what change is, or what the change has resulted in, and becomes very hard to predict. It's actually impossible to predict the future, because the future doesn't exist. So there's no such thing as a future in his system.
From this, does all, it seems that allow me to play the ignorant devil's advocate here. Surely all differentiation between what we would normally consider progressive steps, or differences in possibility, like that thing has happened, this thing is going to happen. Does all differentiation between relations simply become relational and communicational, right? It's just a fluxing difference, as opposed to there seems to be a complete removal of definitive borders here.
Yeah, I mean, Bergson does not deny that he distinguishes between two types of knowledge, I guess, or two ways of looking at the world. And one of these is the sort of when we separate things, a sort of an analytical type of knowledge. Like I separate healthy food from bad food, or something like that. So like we need to separate things because it contributes to our everyday life. It keeps us alive, basically, if we make distinctions between things. So Bergson doesn't deny that has a sort of local relevance to our everyday life, but he very much denies that that's actually the case in so reality. That's not reality. That's just our way of. So we make artificial. We construct artificial differences between things. But in Bergson's philosophy, everything is change. Basically, there really is, and everything is a change which is happening now. This is the central thesis of my book, is that if we follow Bergson consequently, we find that everything is changing always. And it's very hard to imagine this, because this is so very different. He admits it several times. This way of thinking about the world has nothing to do with our everyday experience of the world, because that's something very different completely. I don't see a continuity of change in my room or something. I have a table and a chair, and I can't and a cup, and it's very hard to live that way. If I mix up my cup with my chair, it leads to bad results. But regarding this, back to the nature of progress, it becomes very difficult to think about something like progress. Progress, it has to be like a continuous change, but there's no direction. He says several times that evolution, for example, has no direction. We can't say where it's all heading, basically. And this is a continuity of change. Change is everything. It's the substance of reality, basically. That's what reality is made of change. And this is the basic point of what Bergson is always trying to make. That change is the substance of everything which exists.
So, if that is the case, then how is it that we can hold on to singular things apart from one another?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, and this has been for example, John Mullarkey. He's a very interesting commentator of Bergson. He talks in one of his books about how every philosophy which talks about the world in general, like this is what the world is like, or this is what reality is like. We can always object to any type of philosophy on the basis that if this is what the world is like, this is what reality is, then how can someone claim the opposite? Like, how is it possible then for someone to say that, I don't know, everything is made of separate atoms or separate molecules or whatever? Like, how is it possible then? Why is it even possible for me or anyone else to think about a different type of worldview? Like, this was a criticism of Bergson by many, like Bertrand Russell, for example, who said that on what basis does Bergson claim that everything is change? And the answer for that is intuition, basically. Like, you have to have an intuition of this change. Either you have it or you don't. So it's a very tricky thing, because a scientist might say that this is not a scientific mode of knowledge, but it's more like esoteric type of thing. Like, it's you will either experience intuition of reality or you don't. You experience the intuition of change or you don't. And this is a valid criticism. So I'm not saying that this could be like an epistemological weak point of what he's talking about, because not everyone experiences the world as change. So it becomes a sort of tricky. It becomes almost like a belief. Like, it's not a knowledge, I guess. So I wouldn't deny that this is a problem, but it's nevertheless it's an appealing type of outlook on the world, and it's also surprisingly practical in many ways, because I think it can. So I think a sort of a positive thing we can take from this is that it sort of changes the way we think about the world, and it sort of also changes sort of prevents us from getting sort of too bogged down in our beliefs and our getting too stabilized in our belief systems. So if we think about society, for example, so I guess if we think about society as something which is constantly changing, that prevents us from getting stuck in our everyday habits, for example. I'm going to actually be publishing a book next year about Bergson's social philosophy. So this progress concept, this is actually relates basically to his social philosophy. The idea he he was, for example, the first philosopher who mentioned the idea of an open society, for example. So, and if we think about the world as change, it helps us keep an open mind about reality. And that's very important, I think, especially in this day and age, which is so very much full of dogmatism and sort of also scientism. So the idea that science is capable of showing us what reality is, and we just have to blindly follow what science is about. If we think about reality as change, we can see that our own systems of knowledge are also impermanent and always shifting and changing. So it sort of prevents us from getting really too dogmatic about stuff. But someone could definitely say that if we say that everything is change, that's also a sort of a, how shall I put it? It can also be a dogma in many ways. So I'm not trying to say that this is like a good or bad thing. But, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Just moving forward to something that I imagine is related to and altered for Bergson in relation to this idea of change. It's a quote on page 180 where you state, "The idea of an image which is more than a representation shall prove the key to unmixing the false dualities of mind-body and mind-matter." How is it that Bergson manages to get beyond the sort of, I guess, the age-old mind-body problem? Is it in relation to this his notion of change?
Well, this is his book, Matter and Memory. And basically, he claims that the mind-body and mind-matter dualities, this is a false problem, actually. Like, he denies the basic relevance of the problem itself. And this is a very important move. The way he does this is through the concept of the image. And he claims that the body is also an image, but also that matter is made of images as well. An image is basically a sort of, I would call it access. I think it's like access in terms of like you open a door and you access a room. It's a mode, it's like a universal mode of access. And this connects to your question about communication. I wouldn't say that communication is what Bergson is talking about. Rather, I would say that it's a type of so it's because communication is sort of communication would be like it relates to meaning. For example, communication is a closed circuit, I think. Like we talk about communication when we're talking about two closed systems which share a common meaning. Images in Bergson's philosophy, they don't have a common basis. There's no way of communicating in the sense that they don't transmit meaning to each other. But nevertheless, an image is sort of it's not a image in the sense that I have an image of the world. It's not a representation. It's rather it's sort of, I guess, an opening up to each other of different types of duration. Like when we think about our own everyday life, like I'm a living being, I'm situated in life, in the continuity of life. Like I'm a sort of a living animal, but I'm also human in the sense that I have a sort of psychological time as well. Also, I connected to the cosmic time. So I also have a sort of connection to the cosmic time. And the way I connect to the world is through my body, which is also an image. Bergson says that it's an image among images. So that he doesn't say that my body or my mind is separate from the world. I'm part of the world. And this is the basic point, that there's no real difference between, that's the big idea in matter and memory, that matter is actually contains mind. So that he makes a sort of a panpsychic cosmology. Matter is it's not different from mind. Sort of takes mind out of the body and into the world. The world is full of mind. It's not the same type of mind as my own mind, obviously. A human nervous system is very more advanced than an ant's or something. So like, Bergson isn't saying everything is conscious necessarily. That's something different. But he does say several times in Matter and Memory that the sort of beginnings of consciousness are there in matter. So that he sort of decomposes this ontological barrier between mind and matter. Like for him, these aren't that different. It's not a dialectical opposition or anything. Matter is mind, and mind is also matter. It's not a huge ontological difference between the two. This is a revolutionary idea, I think, because there have been earlier thinkers. He's not the first panpsychist, but I think he's one of the first modern philosophers to really, I think, get underneath this mind-body problem. So not going head first through it, but sort of go underneath or. And this is the way Bergson gets beyond this duality, because it's completely, I think it's one of the most counterproductive false problems in philosophy. This idea that mind can somehow be surgically separated from matter, or the body can be distinguished from the mind. You have huge amounts of research today which completely reject this idea that the mind can somehow be like separated from the body or uploaded, or we can upload our minds to like a hard drive or something. That's complete nonsense, I think. Our mind is only it can't be separated from our body. Like it's the two of it's one of the biggest mistakes in the history of philosophy. This separation between these two, and Bergson has been just hugely influential. I don't address this in the book, but for Maurice Merleau-Ponty, for example, in his late work, The Visible and the Invisible, that's hugely influenced by Bergson, for example. Merleau-Ponty also goes in the same direction. Like, how can we go beyond this Cartesian separation between mind and matter, or mind and body? So that's the way Bergson does it. He reduces everything in that book to images. But images are also, so duration also plays a huge role in this, because my duration, like my psychological duration, it's integrated into the other duration. So we have a hierarchy of different types of change, of matter, life, and mind. And these aren't, at the end of the day, everything really does get, everything really is continuous. At the end of the day, all we have is change, just different types of change. So that's the gist of what Bergson is trying to do. And this is the way he also in another book he does this thing between freedom and determination. It's also like the free will debate is also something which he thinks is a false problem. So he does this several times with false dualities, false problems. And it's a very interesting way of approaching these.
Why does he see the free will debate as a false problem?
Well, he thinks that the free will freedom is basically it's so the two sides of this debate are the determinists, who think that everything is determined in advance. On the other hand, Bergson says that the people who think about free will, they're talking about how we can give ourselves future goals. Like I can give myself a goal which I can achieve in the future. Bergson says that freedom is actually, it's not about giving myself a purpose, and it's also not about, freedom is more about being spontaneous now, like in the present. I have to go back to the present and sort of do something without being impeded. And it's a false problem because both the determinists and the indeterminists, like the people who believe in free will and people who reject free will, they don't question the idea that they're sort of thinking about time in a different way than what Bergson is talking about. So that neither of these positions, people who believe in free will, they're talking about how the future is open. But people who talk about determinism, they're also talking about a future which is closed. But neither of these positions questions the basic ontological status of the future. Like they always talk about a future decision, which I'm going to arrive at based on a previous based on previous possibilities. It's again the problem of possibility. Like if someone believes in free will, they talk about how I can achieve future possibilities. This is most often how people talk about free will. But Bergson, he says that freedom and free will exists. Like he defends free will, but he says that it's not about achieving a future possibility, because he rejects the very idea of a possibility. So this is why both determinists, and so people who reject free will and people who affirm free will, both of them are wrong, because both of them are talking about doing things in terms of possibility. And the possibility does not exist. The future does not exist. So neither does the past, actually, but that's a different topic altogether. This is why they're both wrong, that they're talking about future possibilities or impossibilities. And in this sense, both of these are completely delusional, basically, if we accept what Bergson is talking about.
And so this is why your book is subtitled The Philosophy of the Enduring Present. That's where everything is maintained, is held.
Yes, it's all about the present. The present is where everything happens, basically. It's not always the same present. So like my present is different from your present. It's different from the present of just a material object. It has this cup has a different present. The universe has an altogether different present. So everything has a different present, but everything interesting which happens in the universe, it's in the present. It happens. Duration happens in the present. This is a constant. Bergson says this every time, that it's a very simple message, but it's still got lost in translation or something. That all duration it goes in the present. It's a present which is always changing, but it's nevertheless a present. So like we can't go back to the past and say that nothing is happening in the past anymore. It's dead. It's gone. The future isn't here yet. So what's the point of talking about the future? So it leaves us with the present, basically. If there's no such thing as possibility, we have pure change, pure actualization. That's what Bergson is doing. It's taking us back to the present. That's the huge importance of what he's talking about. And it's an ethical message. It's an ontological message. It's all of these. It's a political message in many ways. So I wanted to go back actually to this. So why Bergson was his popularity? Why did it decline? And part of it was the Einstein debate, but another part of it is sort of politics in many ways. Like Bergson wasn't really a deeply political thinker, and this is why he was sort of rejected by some parts of academic life. That he wasn't a really terribly progressive thinker, because he wasn't a utopian. Like you can't say what's the ideal type of society. What Bergson is trying to say is very much all about how keeping our options open, but also trying to remain in the present, in this present which is always changing. So it's not like static or anything. But yeah, so we have to always retrace our steps and get back to the present before we get lost in the realm of make believe.
Okay. Does he ever comment at length on what sort of happens if we stay in, as you say, that realm of make believe? Are all our assumptions from that point on just incorrect?
Well, I mean, possibility is duration. It's interesting because it's more than any consciousness we have of it. So change is always more than what I can think about, and it's always more than what I can fit in my brain. And this is very important when it comes to why do we. So Bergson, he mentions virtuality in matter and memory, in the way that an animal wants to jump on another branch or something. Like in the jungle, you have a monkey which wants to jump on another branch, and the monkey has to sort of think about what's going to happen if I jump onto the other branch. So I have to virtually sort of think through whether I have to hesitate. Maybe hesitation is very important for Bergson's philosophy of mind, because the more I hesitate, the more intelligent I am. So that this is one of the key takeaways of what he says. He says this, that the more I can think about what I'm going to do, the more intelligent I am. So we, in practical everyday life, we do need to think sometimes about what the consequences of my actions are going to be. What happens if I can't reach the branch and I fall down and the tiger eats me? And stuff. So we need virtuality, but we can't forget that the virtual is still just virtual. It's not real, and we can't confuse this with the present. So that's when problems start, when philosophers and thinkers, they confuse some future thing with what is actually here, and this is a very huge risk in the 21st century, especially when we have all these utopias and or dystopias, whatever. Actually, it's more dystopian today than utopian, but we should not confuse the visions of the future with the present. The present is really what matters. And we have all these political discourses about climate change and whatever, and all these things, which I'm not, denying climate change or anything. I'm just saying that we have to sort of, in many ways, get real about the present, and not get too lost in future, in simulations of what the future will be like, about projections and all that. We shouldn't confuse projections with reality. That's all what Bergson is talking about. Also, what I'm trying to actualize is that we really have to, through the power of intuition, sort of get back to this living knowledge of the present.
Do you think that's why? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh yeah.
I was going to say, do you think that's why the Deleuze, beginning from the Deleuzian point of view, could be a little almost dangerous, because there is this clear emphasis on virtuality?
Yeah, Deleuze is very much a utopian, at least in the 1960s, and I think this is one of the key reasons why he places such a huge emphasis on the virtual. He doesn't just say that the virtual is the equal to the actual. He actually says that Deleuze says that the virtual is superior to the actual. It's everything is the virtual, and actually the actual is almost nothing. That is just, I think, a classic form of utopian thinking. The idea that especially the future that's going to be the future is I have to be more aware of the future than the present, and that just leaves us dreaming, I guess, and it completely. It gets our head in the clouds. We become like a Platonist in many ways. Like we get lost in these ideas, and we forget the real stuff which is here right now. So it doesn't mean that we shouldn't. Like Bergson, he wasn't like an anti-science type of person or anything. Like he didn't deny natural science, or he didn't say that we shouldn't think about the future at all. That's not what I'm saying either. It's just that we sort of have to keep things in perspective, I guess, in many ways. Like it's very hard to do this, especially in a world which is so full of noise. It's hard to distinguish between what's important, what's not important. And it's not far from easy. So it's not easy to select noise from information. But I think this sort of awareness of being in the present, it can help us even on a personal level, like not in the big stage of philosophy or history or anything. It can help us sort of, it can be therapeutic in many ways. I found it therapeutic in the sense of like being and this sounds like a sort of like a new age type of like stuff, but I found Bergson's philosophy useful on a personal level of like getting back to this situated awareness of the present. It's very meditative in many ways that I don't let my thoughts go get lost in always, like if you always think about what the future and like what bills I have to pay or where I'm going to be in 10 years, I'll be a miserable person, so like you can't get lost always in the future. You have to be in the present. It doesn't mean you shouldn't think about the future at all, but it really is important to sort of remain true to the present, and it's very useful from this perspective. I think that this intuitive, this getting being inside of my duration, being at home in my duration, is very important ethically.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to add about your book that you feel we've missed? I mean, I would just say to listeners that it's a fantastic book. It explains a lot very quickly, and it's written both academically and quite beautifully at times. So, but is there anything else you'd like to add?
Thanks for the compliment. I think there was this question you mentioned about what is permanent for Bergson, or what?
Yes, as of stability.
Yeah. So what's stability for Bergson? And I think Bergson's philosophy, it's really about the stability and eternity of change. I guess if we could reduce it to a simple formula, it's change is everything. Change is everything. That's it. That's the couple of words. That's the basic formula of what Bergsonism really is. And he was in many ways like his first book is about Lucretius, for example, Lucretius, and who was an Epicurean philosopher. But Bergson there was this question you mentioned about this is the written about how Bergson connects to Lucretius.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that Bergson was not an atomist. This is also one of the most important scientific breakthroughs, I guess, of Bergson, is that he wasn't he wasn't an atomist in the sense that Bergson does not believe that there are separate atoms in the world. Like, he was very much, he even talks about in the Matter and Memory of how each particle actually has a wave function as well. Like, this is decades before quantum physics. So that was a huge thing for me, because this is so Bergson, as a philosopher, is sort of thinking about physical problems, and everything is sort of like made of waves and continuities, and there's no atoms aren't really separate from each other, and like, this is very inspiring for me that Bergson, as a philosopher who wasn't a physicist, was capable of really finding something new about the world, and like, just through speculating about stuff. And speculation is always a risk. Like, if we speculate, we're taking risks about what if I'm going to write something which is stupid or scientifically inaccurate or whatever. Like, philosophy has to be brave, I think. Philosophy has to sort of have the guts to say new things about the world, even beyond our current knowledge. When Bergson wrote about this, about how atoms are not separate from each other, that was not the norm back then. There was something new, which was only at the cutting edge of physics back then. This was in the late 19th century. And back then they were starting to talk about magnetism and how there's these forces which keep the world together and stuff. And they were talking about ether and a lot of different kinds of things. But Bergson, as a philosopher, he was capable of saying something new about what atoms are, for example, and that's just huge for me. Like, that's really inspiring, because I think philosophers do have important things to say about the world, which maybe can be different from what physicists are currently talking about. So that's why Bergson is hugely inspiring for me. He had the guts to talk about things which are very different from the natural sciences. And it turned out that he was actually correct in some things. Like, it really, quantum physics later did discover that atoms are in many ways continuous. Maybe not in exactly the way Bergson said, but there is so they aren't really that completely separate from each other. That's a huge revelation for me, that he did that. Bergson wrote about this decades before the quantum physicists. Yeah, but that's just a long bracket or something. That's
Okay. Where would you advise people to begin with Bergson, and then I guess perhaps where would you advise people to begin to understand the Deleuze's effects on the history of Bergson philosophically?
I think we should begin with, if someone wants to read Bergson, I think they should read his three major works, which are Time and Free Will, then Creative Evolution, and Matter and Memory. I think all of Bergson's philosophy is basically contained in these three books. But if you want to start with the very basics, I think you need to read, if someone wants to start with the basics, that they have to read Introduction to Metaphysics. I think that's the title. That's one of Bergson's like shorter essays, like for someone who's wants to begin like from the very beginning, because that's where you have the really key points of Bergson's philosophy. What is intuition? What's change? What is reality? That's the basic. That's the starting point. From there, I think anyone can. It's not very complicated. I think that was also very important for me. That Bergson is easy to not easy to understand, but not hard to understand. So it's not like reading Hegel or something. It's not a bloody nightmare. read Bergson. So that was also a very important for me. So he tries to explain things like really as simply as he can. It's not that complicated, but it's also like his language is very colorful as well. Like his examples are also regarding the like reading Bergson after Deleuze. We can't forget Deleuze at all. Deleuze does his later books. These are the cinema books. The ones he wrote on like the two cinema books. These were in the 1980s. And there, Deleuze actually comes closer to Bergson, and those actually have a way more interesting philosophy of time, which is not this virtual is everything type of Deleuze. It's a very different type, of more advanced type of Deleuze. So if we can put it that way. So we can't forget Deleuze at all, and I don't suggest that we do so, but I do think we need to, I guess, revise the way we read Deleuze's Bergsonism book, the 1960s. So the Bergsonism, because that really is not a commentary of Bergson as we've discussed. So we do have to change the way we read Deleuze, and we really have to read Deleuze as a Deleuzian and not as a historian of other philosophers. So we have to forget that type of reading of Deleuze. But reading Deleuze as himself, like as a philosopher who's talking about their own philosophy, that's completely fine. So I don't have a issue with that, but I do have a major issue with reading like Nietzsche or Spinoza through Deleuze. That's the wrong way to approach these thinkers, I think.
Okay. Whereabouts can we find your book?
Well, it's available as an ebook or through the publisher, I think. There's also, it's like on Amazon and a couple of places. There's also, if anyone is interested, I can send them how should I? Can send them a discount voucher. If that's a help for anyone. It's like an official discount voucher for someone who wants to. They have this discount until the end of this year. So if someone finds the price a little bit too much, they can find an easy discount through me. So yeah, there's a couple of like online places which have it. Yeah.
Okay. And do you blog anywhere? Or are you working on anything? You're working on this other book about Bergson's social philosophy.
Yes, I have this Facebook website, Facebook page. It's called Absentology, with the big like absence, Absentology. Mm-hmm. And I usually post news about my stuff through that page. So maybe we can like add it to the
description. Yeah,
description. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, it's been really good. I really enjoyed your book. Adam Lovasz, thanks very much for coming on.
Thank you.